Today, I'm going to show you how to create a realistic tattoo out of any design in Photoshop. Hey there, and welcome to Phlearn. My name is Aaron Nace. You can find me on Phlearn.com, where we make learning fun. In today's episode, we're going to take any design, either done in Illustrator, Photoshop, or a hand drawing, and turn that into a tattoo. Now, the key part of this technique is taking a design that was done on a computer and making it look like it was done by hand. In Photoshop, we're going to show you how to use filters to make that line drawing look more organic. And we'll finish today's episode by showing you how to apply the tattoo onto skin and making it look realistic. We've even got a custom brush available for free download on Phlearn.com that you can use to paint shading on your tattoo. We got a great tutorial. Let's jump into Photoshop. So we're starting off with our stock image as well as our design. Now this is from John Melvin. This is on the Noun project. And it's a PNG on a transparent background. If you've got your design on a white background, that's not a problem. Actually, we're gonna put a white background on this. We're gonna use our Move tool and hold Shift and click and drag from one image to another. And you can see it's a little bit larger than we need. We're gonna hit F for full screen. And then I'm gonna go ahead and make this a little bit smaller. So Control or Command T, we're gonna go ahead and shrink this down. Now, I'm going to be applying some effects onto this design, and I want those effects to be at a larger scale. So I don't actually want to shrink this down to the full size just yet. Right about here looks good. It's going to wind up being about this size, quite a bit smaller, but you want to start off with a design that's larger than what you need. Now, as you can see here, it's a really great design, but it doesn't look like a tattoo. It looks like an Illustrator design at this point. So what we're going to do is put a white background underneath this design. Let's go ahead and grab our marquee tool. There we go. Make a selection. I'm going to create a new layer, and we're going to go ahead and fill this with white. Now that we fill this with white, let's go ahead and place it behind our design, and I'm going to merge these layers together by shift-clicking the two of them and hitting Control or Command E. Now we're going to make a selection by holding Control or Command and clicking on the thumbnail, and we're going to use our filters to make it look more organic. So let's go to Filter. We're going to go down to our Filter Gallery. Here in our Filter Gallery, let's create a new filter. We're going to open up the Distort menu and click on Glass. Now, as you can see, at this point, it doesn't really look exactly like what we want. We're going to bring up our smoothness until we do have some variance in our edges, but they're just not as rough. There we go. So that looks pretty good. Now, the key to this technique is creating a few different glass filters. So at this size, you can see we've got a scaling of 100%. We do have a pretty good amount of variation, but I want to add a little bit more. So we're going to click on the new filter icon. This time we're going to bring our scaling up. There we go. Bring our smoothness up a little bit. Let's go ahead and bring our scaling up a little bit more, and our distortion. So the key is you want to make sure you have a few different scaling options, so you have distortion at low levels as well as high levels. There we go. We'll go ahead and bring that up as well. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and make one more. We'll bring our scaling all the way up. There we go. We'll bring our distortion down just a little bit. That looks good. And we'll do one more, and this time we'll just bring our scaling way down. Let's bring our distortion up. Okay. So if I turn all of these off, you can see here's the before, looks very much like it would straight out of Illustrator, and here's the after. Now we've added quite a bit more variation to the design. At this point, keep in mind that this design is larger than what we need. So when we shrink it down, these effects are going to shrink down a little bit. So you want to exaggerate just a little bit at this stage. When you're happy with your design, hit OK, and it will go ahead and make that transformation. So we have our design. The next thing I need to do is get this back on a transparent background, and it's actually pretty easy to do. We're going to go to Window and down to Channels. We're going to click on our blue channel and then hold Control or Command and click right here on the thumbnail of your blue channel. That's going to select out the light areas of your photo. Next, we want to inverse the selection. So we'll go to Select and then down to Inverse, which then selects the dark areas. In this case, it's just selecting the lines. Now, if you started with your design on a white background, this is how you cut it out and put it on a black background. So now our darks are selected. We're gonna go back into our layers. I'm gonna create a new layer. We don't need this other layer. On our new layer, we're gonna go to Edit and down to Fill, and we're gonna fill this with black. Let's hit OK. Now, we're gonna deselect. As you can see, it did fill our design with black, but it filled everything else with black as well. That makes sense because we selected it with our channels. So now all I have to do is use my marquee tool here, make sure I've got a selection right around my design, and then we'll go to Select, down to Inverse, and then I'm gonna hit the Delete key, which will get rid of everything else. So whether you started with a transparent or an image on a white background, now we have our design that's been properly adjusted to look more like a tattoo, and it's on a transparent background. Now it's time to scale the tattoo down and apply a couple of warping techniques to make it look like it's on the skin. We're gonna hit Control or Command T for the transform. Let's go ahead and hold Shift and click on the corner and scale it down. So you can see the effects that we had with the line quality. Those effects are now scaled down as well, which is just gonna make it look more like a realistic tattoo. There we go. And I'm just gonna place this right about where I think it should go. Okay, now that looks great. Let's go ahead and zoom in, Control or Command plus a couple of times, and we're gonna apply our first warping technique, and this is with the Smudge tool. Now, the Smudge tool is just gonna help us kind of blur the lines in a couple of different places. And if you look at a tattoo, you can see in some places the ink seeps into the skin, so that's kind of what we're imitating. Now, let's go to our Smudge tool. It's located here under the Blur tool. We'll go to Smudge. Now make sure we do not want to click Sample All Layers, so make sure that's unclicked. Make sure Finger Painting is unclicked as well, and our strength is gonna be at about 50%. So now we're gonna choose a large brush, and you can see the Smudge tool basically works by clicking and dragging, okay? In that case, I did way too much, but that's the idea here. So we're gonna click and drag just a little bit in a few different places, and what this is gonna do is it's gonna make it look like the tattoo is more incorporated into the skin. It's gonna leave the edges still sharp, but just with a little bit of blur to them. There we go, which is gonna make more realistic. Pull that out just a little bit there. And you can see it's just starting to look a lot more realistic. So let's go through the before. There's our before we did any smudging, and there's the after. The before and the after. At this point, you can also use the Liquify tool to make the design look like it's wrapping around skin. So we'll make a selection with our image. There we go, a little bit larger than we need. I'm still on the same layer. We're gonna go to Filter and down to Liquify. With the Liquify filter turned on, I'm gonna click Show Backdrop, and we're gonna use our background layer so I can see what I'm doing. There we go. Let's make sure the mode is set to Behind. So now I can use my forward warp tool, and you can see I'm able to move my design around and see how it looks on skin. So in this case, maybe we'll just kind of push this design just a little bit. We're kind of putting it onto a relatively flat area, but if you're in a curved area like around someone's arm, you might just want to move this design just a little bit to make it look like it's actually going around the curve. Okay, and in this case, I think that looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and hit OK. The next step is to make the tattoo look like it's incorporated into the skin. To do that, we're gonna add a slight bevel and emboss. Let's double click here on your layer. You can also go to FX and down to blending options. And here in my blending options, we're gonna turn on bevel and emboss. Now to start off, let's go ahead and put a larger bevel and emboss than we need. You wanna match the light about to the light on your image. So in this case, you can see the light is pretty much coming from the top down. There we go. We'll increase our depth just so we can see what we're doing. At this point, we want to make sure our style is set to outer bevel. You want the light to be a little bit outside of your design. We're going to bring our size up just a little bit. There we are. And we're going to soften just a little bit as well. Okay. At this point, it's way too strong of an effect. So we're going to take the mode for both the highlight, which is currently set to screen. We're going to change that to soft light blend mode. And the shadow, we're going to change that to soft light as well. There we are. And we can adjust the opacity of our shadow and our highlight. Now, this is a subtle technique, but it basically makes it look more like the tattoo has a little bit of dimension with the skin. So let's hit OK. Zooming in here. And I can just turn this off and on so you can see what it does. It's a very, very subtle technique, but it does help the tattoo look like it's more incorporated. Next, we're going to make it look like parts of that tattoo are seeped into the subject's skin. To do this, we're going to duplicate this layer, Controller Command J, and we're going to apply a blur to it. We'll go to Filter, Blur, and down to Gaussian Blur, and we just want a slight blur, there we are, just around the edges. Something like, in this case, 3 or 4 pixels looks pretty good. So zooming in, here's our very slight blur. Now at this point, we want to make sure our blending mode is set to multiply, only making it darker. We're going to bring our opacity down as well. We want opacity of about 20 to 30%. So let's make that nice and subtle. And then we're going to put a layer mask on this. Let's hold Alt or Option, click on my layer mask, which makes a black layer mask. We have a black layer mask on this blur layer, which just makes it invisible. Now we want to paint white on our layer mask in a few areas. Again, the key is making this look a little bit more random, especially the areas where multiple different lines of ink would converge. It's just going to make sure more ink seems visible in those places. That's where this ink is going to really seep in. Here on our layer mask, let's go ahead and paint white just with a regular brush tool. And I'm kind of focusing on areas where multiple different lines converge. There we go. And what this is doing is just making it look like a little bit more of the ink is kind of seeping in these places. And again, it's making it look a little bit more organic, a little bit more variable. That's kind of the key with this sort of thing. After all, we're converting basically just an Illustrator design into something we want to look like is a part of the skin. There we go. And that's starting to look pretty good. Let's just turn this off and on so we can see what effect that has. Again, it's subtle, but it is starting to look more realistic. At this point, we're ready to add a little bit of shading to the tattoo. Now, if you haven't already done so, you can download this custom brush on Phlearn.com. You can just follow the link on your screen or right down below. It's totally free and it works really well for realistic shading. So let's go ahead and load the brush in. We're going to go to Edit, down to Presets, and over to our Preset Manager. Now, let's make sure we're clicked on Brushes, and we're going to go to Load. So go ahead and find the brush that's included in the download, Phlearn Tattoo Stipple Brush.abr, and hit Open. That's going to go ahead and add that brush to your menu. Let's hit Done, use our brush tool, and we'll right-click and make sure we go to our brush. So this is the Phlearn Tattoo Stipple Brush. Now, in this case, we just want to make sure that black is set to our foreground color. There we go. And you can make your brush larger and smaller if you need. In this case, we're going to make it a little bit smaller and simply start painting in right in this area. And this brush is used to kind of imitate the stippling technique that's done with traditional tattoos. There we go. Now, I'm just going to simply paint right over the area that I'd like this brush to show up. And then in a minute, we're going to use our layer mask to hide it. There we go. And you can use the brush larger or smaller to get a little bit of fading in. There we are. Let's make it a little bit smaller. Go a little bit larger. And bring that right in. This is a totally optional step, but I find it just makes it look a little bit more realistic and gives it more of that hand-done touch. Okay. Now, making this layer visible and invisible, we just have to use a layer mask. So let's go ahead and put a layer mask on that. I'm then going to choose a regular brush and then just paint black on the layer mask where I don't want this to show up. So in this case, we're just going to go super simple with this. There we go, right there, just inside the bird. So turning that off and on, really nice effect. Now we want to apply a little bit of a blur here just to further incorporate it with the rest of the design. So let's click on our layer. We'll go to Filter, down to blur, over to Gaussian blur, and we're gonna use a super, super low radius here, okay? Like 0.1 or 0.2 pixels. That's really all we need. In this case, we'll go with 0.3. All right. So now we've added our little bit of stippling in there, and you can see it just gives it more of that tattoo-esque feel. At this point, we're almost done. We just need to make the tattoo look like it's in the skin instead of right on top of the skin. And it's actually really easy to do. Just duplicate your background layer, put it over top of everything, and then you can kind of fade it in. I'm gonna click on my background layer. We'll hit Control or Command J to duplicate that. Let's go ahead and bring it all the way up to the very top. And then I'm gonna put a black layer mask on this. So let's hold Alt or Option and click on our layer mask, which just simply makes it invisible. Now, we're gonna use a regular brush here, and we're gonna paint white on our layer mask with a really low flow, about 10%. Let's go ahead and zoom out here. So with this brush, you can see basically I'm just painting in the background, okay? There we go, painting right over top it. So if I use a really low flow, I'm gonna kind of focus on the highlight areas and anywhere the tattoo just looks like a little bit too dark. And what this is gonna do is bring back a little bit of the skin over top of the tattoo and make it look like the tattoo is underneath the skin. Okay, so especially like you can see following this highlight here, this is where we want to bring the skin back a little bit. There we go, right over top of the little bit of stippling there. And I do suggest just painting this in rather than lowering the opacity of your entire layer because it'll look more random and more realistic. Turning this off and on, it really helps to incorporate the design into the skin. In the last little detail work, we're gonna use the same tattoo stipple brush to add some skin texture over top of the tattoo. Let's make a new layer. B for the brush tool, we'll use the same brush here. Now before, we just painted with black, right? So it looked like this. This time, let's go ahead and clear this layer. We're gonna use our brush tool, and I'm gonna sample the color of the skin by holding Alt or Option and clicking. Now we'll use our brush, we'll make it nice and small, and we'll go ahead and paint in. So if it was a little larger, it would look like this. Okay, let's just go ahead and clear that. We'll make our brush smaller. There we go, even smaller. And this is just gonna make it look like a little bit of skin texture right over top of parts of the design. There we go. And I'm gonna apply just a tiny bit of blur to that as well. So zooming in, we'll just turn this off and on, and you can see it looks like a little bit of skin texture over top parts of the design. Same over here, and put a tiny bit over there as well with a little blur. At this point, our tattoo is completely done. Now, if you want to, you can still do some slight adjustments and move the tattoo. Simply select your layers that the tattoo is visible. In this case, I can hit Control or Command T, and I could rotate the design around. Just keep in mind, if you do move it completely, which you can most definitely do, you just want to make sure you paint some skin back visible over top. And there we go. Our tattoo is now fully incorporated into our subject. If you want to try this on your own, here are the basic steps. First, you want to turn any line drawing into something that looks more organic using the filter gallery. I recommend using the glass filter and adding a couple to create a little bit of variation. Next, you want to use the Smudge tool and the Liquify tool to give it a little bit more of a realistic feel and incorporate it with any three-dimensionality in the skin. We added a very subtle bevel and emboss to give it a more three-dimensional appearance, and we duplicated the tattoo, giving a slight blur, making this visible in any areas we have more ink. This is gonna make the ink seem like it's seeping into the skin. And to finish it up, we duplicated our background layer and then subtly painted this over top of the tattoo, making the tattoo look like it's underneath the skin. And don't forget, you can download this custom brush as well as these sample images on Phlearn.com. Just follow the link in the description right down below or click on your screen right now. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe to our YouTube channel and give us a big thumbs up. Thank you so much for watching. I will Phlearn you later. Bye everyone. You can download the custom brush on Phlearn.com for free. Just wait for the ambulance. All right,